Have you ever found yourself overthinking your gym session? What specific exercise you could choose? What order they go in? How much of a balance you strike between speed, plyometrics, general strength exercises or conditioning? Do we sometimes focus in a little too much on trying to be specific to the sport the athlete is playing? And do we sometimes move away from the broader principles of general athletic development that are the foundation to the majority of ways we express ourselves as players or athletes in the majority of sports? I sat down with Stephen Walsh, an experienced S&C and gym owner. We began by looking at the broader template he uses to structure the majority of his gym sessions around. He's looking at using pretty much the same template across athletes from a number of sports. I think he mentioned he has up to 14 different sports represented in the athletes that come to him. The main sections or components of those sessions may be a little bit longer or shorter based on the athlete's needs, their training age or the stage of the season. But ultimately the main things still make up the majority of his sessions. Once we get into some of the specifics of exercises used or qualities looking to be developed, we start to identify some of the nuances or main things that need to be considered based on what an athlete is competing in. This isn't so much trying to replicate the movements or demands that are placed on them. It's more so looking at what do they get a lot of in their sport. Well, we probably don't need to do a whole pile more of that. What are things they're missing and fill those buckets. Stephen offers so much quality insights and advice here around how you use the basic principles across the majority of players, whether it be male, female or various ages, but then you can identify specific aspects or details or exercises that may be more useful depending on the specific context they're coming from or preparing for. Those for everyone to take from this, whether you're an S&C, a sports coach, an athlete or a parent. You may change some aspects of your S&C or athlete development sessions, or more likely they're going to confirm that an awful lot of what you're currently doing is correct and it's trying to justify the reasons why a lot of the simple things work so well.
Stephen, I saw you were at, I wouldn't say a loose end, but you had a tiny bit more free time due to this injury. I was like, injury's terrible for him, but I'm going to try and see, can I make this bit of time work and get him on the podcast? You've been on my long list for a good while.
Yeah, no, I had a bad dose there. I was back pre-season. I was doing a bit of coaching with the club I used to play with, and then stepping into goals the odd time just as maybe I might play, maybe I won't, and then stepped into goals one night, and then it was about 3 weeks ago, and rolled my ankle, ended up fracturing the outside of it. So in a boot and off my feet in it for meant to be off my feet another 2.5 weeks, but I'll probably try and accelerate the rehab if I can, and get back a little bit sooner. Just because I can't drive, I was coaching last week and I was in a pair of crutches and the boot as well, so it's not ideal.
And like the getting back into it, is that a little bit of gym stuff? You probably have to leave the pitch stuff for a while, or can you dip into a little bit of both of them?
Yeah, I suppose my own clients that I've had like long term, just trying to get back into. I suppose keeping them consistent is probably my first priority. Not trying to do anything with new people because obviously I can't demonstrate anything. So I think just keeping people taking over. It's kind of a down period anyway for a lot of our clients in terms of different sports. So it's not it's not a terrible time for it to happen. And then the pitch stuff again, just because I'm in charge of doing all the session plans from on pitch, so warm ups and the technical and tactical stuff as well. So from a soccer background, like that's another thing that I do outside of the gym stuff, which tends to be can be a little bit more enjoyable as well when you're in the gym all the time, especially for 40, 50 hours a week. So we'll see how that goes.
And speaking of clients and different sports and downtime, what are the different backgrounds of athletes that you do work with? I just noticed from your social media, it seems to be quite a variety of different sports.
Yeah, I think I was talking to we're onboarding new placement students for master's course soon, and I was talking to them last week. I think there's roughly about 12 to 14 different sports across. I'd say during the week you've got your usual, so soccer, rugby, hurling, football, camogie if you want to throw that in as its own sport, basketball. We've got hockey, we've swimmers, Irish dancers. What else do we have? You could class with American football because they played in UL, and one of our coaches, William, plays that. And we have, I'm just trying to think, what else do we have? There's definitely one or two others that are golf and tennis. We've got those two. They're the big ones that we've got like a lot of clients involved in. And then I know we've had because of where the gym is in relation to the hospital. You get a lot of exchange nurses that actually like look for gyms from the States. So you got like lacrosse and ice hockey now are starting to be somewhat prevalent in people inquiring about the gym.
And all those different sports, like a lot of them are coming to you because they want to improve the physical side of themselves to get better at their sport. But from what I can tell, an awful lot of the training you're doing with the different athletes seems reasonably similar. They seem to be following quite similar programs. Is that like a crowd management thing, or is it just, well, maybe the best training is the best training regardless of the sport?
Yeah, I suppose for us, a couple of things. If you take it just from I suppose a development side, a lot of the athletes that we do work with are all majority of them are early training age, so they don't have a lot of training or S&C background. So you're training quite generally anyway. So there's usually no reason to get overly specific around sports. Unless, like I said, we've got, for example, like I've a golfer that trains with me and he's been training with me for 3 or 4 years, but also trains himself during the week. So for his one session that he does with me, we do tend to get a little bit more specific with that in terms of when we do our regular assessments. So we'll get a little bit more specific, but in terms of the the principles that we deploy. So, for example, just out of to make it easy, the way we look at like Irish dancers and what they need is a lot of them are in bad need of just general core strength because of the nature of Irish dancing and that they tend to keep their upper body quite stiff. And they don't use it in their sport, so they tend to be quite weak upper body and core wise. And they also need a lot of foot and ankle strength as well because of the nature of the extremes of the ranges that they'd move into. That's something that they need. And then what we'd look at then is like if you were doing a potentially a max velocity session for a developing athlete, you're looking at kind of the same things around those foot and ankle strength, high levels of force, short contact times, and core strength as well. So they can be loosely bucketed to we can almost use the same session framework, but the actual individualization just becomes from the athlete themselves rather than the sport. Because if you start trying to get into the weeds of individualizing or being too specific, then you're getting closer and closer to what the sport looks like, which is what people think training should be like. And then you miss out on all these general qualities that athletes need to be healthy first and foremost, so that they can train. And that we know just from having coached and dealt with a lot of these athletes in the teams that they're getting quite a lot of volume anyway of their sport specific training. And what they don't need is another hour and a half of more specific things working on the same or hoping for the same outcomes, but then you end up with a position where you have a lot of athletes getting overuse issues, and then they've got so many undeveloped or underdeveloped areas that you don't really make any major gains by being too specific. And I think what we've done really well is being very general with our training framework. So our actual session framework is the same across most sports, and then we might chop and change a few things. So for say for field sport athletes versus golfers, like we do know they need maximal strength, they need power. Golfers don't need to have any sprint prep in their program, but we also know that again from physical qualities that being able to sprint faster raises the potential for the central nervous system, produce force, and move quickly, which is going to be beneficial for the sport in the long run anyway. So I think that's where we try to keep things very general because the athletes do enough training anyway. If you get too specific with their training sessions, you're not really going to move the needle too much.
Yeah, that's really good. We'll dig into your session framework in a minute, but something I was going to come to later, but you brought up yourself now, is around Irish dancers, because majority of coaches listen to this will be GA coaches or GA backgrounds, but I think it's a nice way of like framing things that if you look at what Irish dancing is and what they do, you want to give them that general exposure to some strength training. But then you need to look at what is in their sport. I probably don't need to do any of that at all. I need to support that and nearly do the opposite. Like, for example, when I was teaching, one of our teachers, her daughter was a competitive Irish dancer, and she just asked me for like some general training for her to do. So I just give her like absolute basic strength stuff, some split squats, some RDLs, all like that, just to get through a bit of range. Because like their knees actually don't bend a huge pile. They're, even though like the kicks when their legs come up, their hip isn't under that much load. So I was trying to address all that stuff. And the same girl, her older brother is actually a county minor in Kilkenny, so he'd been doing an awful lot of plyos, and she was asking me, well, should she be doing some of those? And I'm like, she's doing so much of that all week already. There's definitely no need to overload any extra work there. And it's just your base strength stuff that she probably needs an awful lot more of.
Yeah. And I think with that as well is you take what they're already getting. So from the plyo side, they're already doing a ridiculous amount of short contact plyos. Now they're very, very short contact, but they're not. I don't want to say they're not high in force, because they are. But I think if you go the other extreme, where you're thinking like maybe a drop jump, where you've got like longer contact times and you've got like really high levels of force, that's something that you might be able to add in, but you have to control volume so specifically with that, because then you're running into issues with shin splints, especially depending on the time of year, just the way the calendar plays out for them. They're pretty much competing all the time. So I think that's where you can get in some higher level, I suppose, more intense plyos. I think from the strength side, as you said, they don't go through a whole lot of range at the knee. They do get a lot of stretch range, say at the hamstring, and they do need a lot of strength at the hip. So I think they're the two that you'd focus on. So, but then you have to balance it out with giving them training volume around the hamstring, but then not causing too much perceived tightness, because now they're going to be limited in what they can do. And then you have to kind of work with the sport coaches in that sense, which are their dance teachers, that if they see them doing something that's making them worse in the short term, which could happen, that's going to be a problem. And I think also then with a lot of stuff with the visual side of Irish dancing is they do prefer a lot of quad development, and they're not getting that in their dancing. So that's something that we do need to pay attention to. Like you said, your split squats, heel elevated goblet squats, front squats, just getting after like a massive amount of quad development, because it's it's wanted for the visual side of I suppose the aesthetic performance, which Irish dancing is as well. So that's something that we do have to take into consideration.
Yeah, a friend of mine in college is actually an Irish dancer. I think he came second in the world under 16 or something like that. But he had humongous quads, and he also had, even when he gave up Irish dancing, had this amazing like work capacity. When we go to the gym, like he'd never get tired. When we play bits of soccer or basketball like that, he just had this huge base of like being able to stay going for ages. What's the buy-in like from the dance coaches around doing strength work?
Very, very good. We never have an issue there. The issue we probably have is almost that like trying to start too early. Because again, Irish dancing is one of those sports that athletes start so early with. Like you've got like 3 and 4 year olds starting Irish dancing. Kind of similar to swimming in a sense, where you peak very early. Like realistically, once you get to 17, 18, you're once you leave school, or you're done. Bar a few that still compete in it, but the buy-in's very good. The buy-in from parents is very good. I think what the Irish dancing teachers do very well is they teach a very good work ethic to the athletes that they work with. Sometimes it's nearly to the extreme where they don't prioritize rest enough. But like I said, that can be a lot of sports too. The buy-in is usually very good. It's just trying to find time in the week and getting them enough extra S&C work without impacting too much on their daily week, because like some dancers could be dancing 5 times a week for 2 hours at a time. And I think it's one thing that's the two things that you mentioned there was the work ethic that they have, and the fact that like fitness levels are through the roof. Like they'll train like so much more than everyone else. Like GA players think they train a lot when they train 2 or 3 times a week, and I'm like, you don't. Now I know there's the impact and collision side, which collision sports do bring. But I think that, and I think one of the things that I've learned is that Irish dancers, or even we'd say the performative sports, have learned really well how to not look like they're struggling ever, and because they have to compete with this face on, that a smiling face, even when you might ask an athlete during a training session, like, well, how does that feel out of 10? 9 or 10 being like the most you can do, and it might look visually like a 3 or 4, but they'll tell you it's a 9, and I'm like, it couldn't possibly be a 9 because you don't even look like you're struggling. And they've built this capacity to make things look easy. But yeah, buy-in's really good, and it's harder to get them to prioritize proper recovery than it is to get them to train hard. And that's just the simple fact of it.
And you mentioned there on the session framework looks largely the same for each athlete or sport or whatever. Give us a general gist of what that might look like, and then we can see about how there might be individual variations within that.
Yeah, I suppose most of our sessions are 50 to 60 minutes long. Come in and it's usual warm up. So we'll follow the ramp protocol usually for all of our sessions. So raise, activate, mobilize, potentiate. Ideally, what we'll try and do is keep it less than 12 to 15 minutes. If we can get it closer to 10, even better. Just gives us more time to focus on everything else. So you've got your movement-based stuff. So typically they'll come in early anyway. So we'll get them on the biker, because one of our coaches is probably going to be finishing up a session anyway. Then we'll go through our activation stuff, which is going to be your similar stuff like glute bridges, some sort of core work, dead bugs, bird dogs, side planks, some bit of core activation around key muscle areas, and that's your first part of your individualization. So for depending on what kind of session it is, that's where you might focus more on one area versus another. Your mobilized section then, so you're going through maybe like things like your inchworms, world's greatest stretch, just getting some range into those key areas depending on either the sport or the session that's ahead of them. And then you're into your potentiate section, which typically always ends up being the rudiment hop series from Altus. And then we'll go through some of our sprint prep stuff. Now for Irish dancers, that's where it'll look quite similar to if we're doing a max velocity session. So we're upright posture. We are short contact times, and we're looking at almost like that vertical force in our potentiate section. We might also add in some med ball throws, some lower level jumps like broad jumps, box jumps, some short accelerations. And then we're into our first section, which is either going to be our sprint section. So depending on if we've got a sprint prep, so if we're working with a field sport athlete, we might be addressing some acceleration things. So wall switches, single, or some broad jump variations that might give us what we want. So if we're looking at that kind of like first 1 or 2 steps, we might be doing some single leg broad jump variations. And then we actually get into the sprint work section. So we've got our either loaded sprints, heavy or light, depending on what they're working on, or just timed sprints, just working on actually competing against their own times. And then,
sorry, how much space have you got for those sprints? What distance are you able to run those?
The track itself is 20. I think it's 22 long, but we've the runoff obviously to let people slow down. So we've got probably at most 15, 60 meters of actual workable space before athletes have to slow down. So you're never really getting the chance to work on max velocity, but you could do it from a technical side of things. You can do that, and then what we do then is we probably program another session for them to do on their own, where it's less coaching and it's just more sprinting, just get them a chance to open up the legs. So that's our sprint work.
And sorry, the way it sprints, is that the pull behind your sled or a prowler, or sometimes a bit of both?
So depending, so again, if we're doing maybe very early phase work and we're working on a bit more positioning, we might do some prowler pushes, because we can make the sled really, really heavy, and you're getting a good bit of upper body work, bit of core work, and some positioning just in terms of that push. And then we have the smaller sleds that we have both a waist harness and a shoulder harness. So again, if you're working on early stage, like first 5 meters and very heavy, you go with your shoulder harness, because the shoulder harness is going to give you that intent to lean forward without having to tell them. So you get that forward lean, and then you got that, I suppose, that attack back to the floor and then pushing them forward. And you can make the sled very heavy with that. And then you have your waist harness. If you're going slightly lighter, ideally we'd have more space for it, but we'd go lighter and we put the waist harness on, so they're a little bit more upright. So now we're having to get a little bit more, almost like a whip from the hip type motion, where they have to push themselves forward and they can't cheat it too much with a forward lean. So that's where we'd get kind of one of three different variations in that section.
Yeah, that's nice. I've been playing around a good bit with those and kind of mixed them in with some jumps and some, little complexes, going from a standing triple jump into a light sled into maybe a 30-meter sprint, good recovery, and weave their way through that 3 or 4 times. I find it good. And like, some players might derive slightly different benefits from each of the 3, but all added together, everyone is getting something from it.
Yeah, I actually use that it's probably, I might use it for a 4-week block, and I'll do it twice a year with some of our major athletes, pretty similar to yours. I'll go, sometimes I might go heavy sled, and then I'll either use a triple broad jump or I'll use a loaded jump, and I'll measure off the force plates and then into a timed sprint. So now you've got, like, bar the first exercise, now you've got intent and you've got competition on 2 of your exercises. So it just drives intent through the roof, and then you're getting, like, real solid quality work done.
Yeah, so I even find, like, sometimes we might do the first round of sleds and sprints, just do it, and then the next round 3 racing each other with the sled, and then into pairs racing the 30-meter sprint and stuff. But yeah, brilliant for intent, and the first couple potentiate them into that one. Then good. Yeah, after your speed stuff, then what are you into?
So then we're into our, depending on what the speed stuff is, then we're maybe into an actual plyo block. So that here's where you'd put your actual really intense plyos. If we're doing an acceleration session, we'll put those plyos before the sprint stuff. So we'll do our broad jump variations, and we'll do them before the sprint stuff, just to give our athletes the feeling of that projection and that forward lean and trying to push yourself out. And I think then if we're doing if we're prioritizing if we're timed sprints, or we're doing more like max effort work, then we put our plyos after. So that's when you're looking at more of your shorter ground contact times, more vertical plyos, so hurdle hops, drop jumps, those sorts of exercises after. And again, you're managing volume there to suit the sport that you're working with. And then that's where we also probably have our loaded jumps. I think most, if not all, of our athletes, no matter what sport they're in, will do some version of a loaded jump. And we'll just cycle through different phases of, we say, like, heavy loaded jumps, closer to like 30-40% body weight loaded. And then we'll kind of transition all the way down to like lighter loaded, so closer to like 15-20%. And where possible, we'll measure these all the time, because we're just looking at kind of power output all the time, and hopefully that should just be trending upwards, depending on where they are in their season. And then once,
are they like trap bar jumps or just dumbbell squat jumps?
Typically, with, I'd say 90% of athletes, it's all just dumbbell jumps. Just because it's a little bit more comfortable, and not a whole pile of our athletes are at the point where we're not loading off body weight. Example, there's only 1 or 2 that I'd do maybe a barbell jump, because I suppose from a safety side of things, and a lot of athletes we are working with are young training age, or just young in general, so it makes no sense for us to do a loaded jump like that. The trap bar jumps are handy as well, but I think because our trap bar is 20, is it 20? I think our trap bar is 20 kilos. So a lot of our athletes are, I suppose the Irish dancers specifically, are lighter in nature. So like, you only really have need to go up to like maybe 2 6s or 2 8s in your hand. So, but again, depending on what the data is telling us at any given time, we can go to a trap bar jump or a barbell jump as well. There's no issues there, but predominantly it's all dumbbell loaded jumps.
And you done any Olympic lift or variations there? Because you Olympic lift a bit yourself. Do you put it into your training, or do you like This is something I'm into. Juice might not be worth the squeeze for the amount of time I have to spend teaching this to get the benefits from.
Yeah. Again, for most of us, like we're only working with athletes maybe like once a week if we're lucky. We're not, and I think this is the thing people miss out on. You're not in American college who has access to these guys 4 or 5 times a week, where you can devote a short, maybe 8-10 minute coaching block to this. Now, with that said, there is athletes who do ask me for them, and I think from a from a data side, I know, especially with things like hang variations of the snatch, you do get like maybe higher levels of peak power output, and even like rate of force development. So there is scope to put them in somewhere. I just think from a coaching side, and because of most of our athletes are young in nature, you'd still have to go through the proper progressions. Like they need to be able to front squat first and foremost. Because there's no point being able to teach someone a clean if they can't catch a front squat or can't squat to depth. So I think because we're still getting a lot of benefits from our loaded jumps, I see no added benefit to going there just yet. If I had them twice a week and I had to spread my volume out over the week, now all of a sudden I've got maybe 8 to 10 minutes within a coaching session to dose some coaching in there, and we can start to build up. But I don't think it's just where we are right now. It's not worth it for us. There is two specific athletes I can think of, but they're both in their mid 20s, and they're training at least twice a week with us, and they'll train another twice a week on their own. So any of the less technical stuff they can do themselves. Whereas a lot of our athletes might be between 12 and 18. They're training all the time, coached by us. So they're not training by themselves. And therefore, like, we're coaching everything.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Like I'm the same. I really like Olympic lifting, but it's so rare I actually use it on anyone. Even like I teach a few S&C modules, and I have to do the Olympic lifts there, and only one person has ever said I have actually done. Back when I was county minor, we did 6 weeks twice a week of Olympic lifting. But even he said after those 6 weeks are up, that was it, done, gone, no more. So I was like, I don't know. Sometimes I know is it like. I'm always eager to hear people who do it. Why do you do it? How do you fit it in? The same, because it's not like you don't know enough about it. Like you're able to Olympic lift, you know plenty about it here, so you can squeeze it in. So I'm always just open to the discussions around it.
Yeah, it's a funny one too, because I think like when I train Olympic lifts, like my warm-ups are quite long. Like you ask anyone who's an actual weightlifter, and their sessions are 2.5 hours long, because you're getting in and you're probably spending a half an hour like actually just mobilizing yourself before you do anything else. And I think that's something to be conscious of. Again, time limitations. I think as well to coach a field sport athlete to weightlift like a weightlifter is not what we should be doing, because again, most weightlifters are going to, again, they'll do their variations from a hang position or different positions. But I think the majority of the benefits that field sport athletes are going to get from Olympic lifting are going to be from a hang, or like jump, maybe tall variations. So there's that. And then you just run into the issues where there's a certain bandwidth of technical proficiency that we can allow with field sport athletes, whereas like weightlifters, that bandwidth is so much smaller, because they're judged based on not just the weight that they lift, but also how they do it. So there's the little things where, again, like maybe in a jerk for an actual weightlifter, they might lock out with soft elbows, and it might be an actual press out. And in a weightlifting competition, it's a red light. Whereas like I don't like, if a field sport athlete does that, I don't care.
Like you can just get them to push press. They're still getting the benefit from it.
100%. I think it's like we get, like, again, like their strength sports, where their sport is the lift itself, and they're 2 hours, or they might train 15 hours a week, for example, 15-16 hours a week. And of those 15-16 hours, 12 of those are going to be 12-13 hours of those are going to be under a bar doing some sort of strength training. So 80% of their time is strength training, whereas for field sport athletes, maybe 20% of their time is going to be weightlifting, or strength training. So we have to condense as much as we can into that 20%, so that they can go and perform for that 5-10% of the weekend, but then also compete and train for the other 70% of the week. And that's what like our job as the performance coach is.
And having your experience in doing the technical, tactical work and coaching soccer probably opens your eyes a bit more to that. I'd much rather they had good passing technique, receiving technique, dribbling technique, tackling technique than being a little bit better at a hang clean, because what's going to have the biggest long-term benefit to their performance.
Yeah, and it's funny because as I said, like I nearly prefer that coaching sometimes because like so I've as soon as I turned, I think it was like 16, I got my coaching badges. Now I haven't done it anymore since, but I've been like I suppose coaching the technical tactical side of soccer since then, and I think that has allowed me then to always look at when you're training athletes in a gym with the end product in mind. Is not like the gym isn't the be all and end all. It's a pathway for them to be able to perform better at the weekend. And I know then if I have 5 minutes of coaching time, I need to decide what's going to be the best use of that time for myself and also like the athletes in terms of just talking to them in general. And I'm not going to spend that 5 minutes explaining they might have to keep their elbows up an extra half an inch higher in a power clean because you're going to get an extra, maybe 2.5 kilos out of it. Versus if I'm going to spend a bit more time explaining to them about how they performed at the weekend, or like maybe positions that they should be taking up. And that's where I think my blend of, I suppose, between my studies and my own like coaching experiences, that's where like I understand it more. Whereas if you only have an S&C background and all you know is the gym, you become so focused on like the gym is everything. Versus I'm like, no, the outcome at the weekend is I suppose is the outcome that we're looking for. Obviously, enjoyment is probably the peak like thing we're looking for, because if you get to the point where people don't enjoy it, then it doesn't matter what you're doing. But I feel like that's another conversation as well.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. Like, it's ultimately like we're there largely to support the playing well of the sport, and not being injured, being as fit and fast as you can be within the time frame allowed is giving them, from our perspective, the best chance to be good and get the result they want from the sport. Like, ultimately, I think a lot of the S&C should nearly be a leveler. Like, you shouldn't really be winning a game. Like, if all S&Cs did their job well, you're just not losing a game because you're less fit than the opposition. But realistically, everyone should be up around a similar level, but that doesn't always happen for any number of reasons.
Yeah, I think that's where you get it as well. Like the higher the level you go, the less of a difference that does make. Obviously, at the amateur levels or the youth levels, that does become it does become a game changer. And I think that's why you see people getting into it earlier and earlier. Sometimes it's for the right reasons, because S&C obviously has you're trying to teach kids like life skills and strength training because kids aren't playing, and all that sort of conversation that we could have about it. But then you also get the other side of people who are getting those into S&C early because they see it as a difference maker at the younger ages. And then it's becomes that race to the bottom, because now you'll have people starting S&C at like 6, 7, 8. And now it becomes structured S&C rather than playing. And that's the other problem with it. But as you said, like likewise, the higher the level you go, the S&C and the technical tactical stuff should all be combined somewhat to support each other. But I think the other extreme of that, and you'll have seen it at some point as well, if you ever see S&C sessions from teams in Spain, you'll have seen them. They're typically all like balance orientated, coordination. And what to us looks ridiculous, and for the large part it is. I think I started doing, it was during COVID, and I started doing an S&C course on it was the University of Barcelona, and I saw firsthand. I was like, now it makes sense as to why clubs do it like this, because they do have such the blend of like technical and tactical, and it's this like whole idea of like physical coordination versus where I suppose in Europe and America, we'd look at it from a increased force production, increased rate of force production, increase aerobic capacity, anaerobic output, all those like physical qualities, almost like not separately, but as part of the whole. They now are like adding the coordination of like, okay, well, here's the correct amount of force production that you need and the coordination to pass the ball, which is why their S&C looks like the sport, and that's the other extreme of not thinking about the sport. So you have to find yourself somewhere in the middle, or just sliding either side of that in a sliding spectrum across a year.
I remember seeing did Kaká move from AC Milan to Real Madrid or the other way around? Because I remember him talking about like the huge contrast between AC Milan's approach of like going to the gym, lifting weights, getting stronger versus Real Madrid, where it was all just around be more skillful. Just do what you needed to be more skillful.
Probably was AC Milan to Real Madrid, because I think would have been. But again, like that's the other extreme, and neither extreme is right or wrong at any time. It just sometimes like all of your training can't be that, and also like none of your training or some of your training can't not include the coordination side. And it's just like trying to find that balance. And that's where, so even back to what we were saying about like the session structure that we have in the gym, is trying to touch on as many like different like qualities as we can, because you don't have that much time. And it's the goal is to improve the physical qualities that support performance, versus our direct goal isn't just to improve performance, it's to improve the physical qualities that support it. And ultimately it'd be like the team sport coaches or the Irish dancing coaches, it's their job to improve the, I suppose, execution of whatever skills that they need during games.
Yeah, we're kind of looking at, we're trying to improve the performance potential, raise the where the potential ceiling is in terms of overall output, but they're trying to use what we've done physically to bring everything else on. Before we jump back into the session structure and look at some of the strengths of, I'm just eager here, how much like are you communicating with coaches? We've touched on it with the Irish dancers, but say like when you're working with a soccer or GA team, like are there many times when it's an individual comes to you and you're kind of like maybe talk to their parent, maybe talk to them, and that's kind of it, and you hope you can give them another session to do once a week and to get it done, versus a manager of a team comes to you and you do a group session or a couple of mini group sessions, you give them stuff to do, say like your max velocity work on the pitch, and you like sometimes wondering, I hope to do it, or I know they'll do it, I just hope to do it well, or like all the different things that can go on there.
Yeah, it's always difficult, because obviously find ourselves in one of those two positions where we're either we're going to be working with a team for the year or for a 6 month period, whatever it is, or you might come in to do one or two sessions every so often, and it's the short term ones are always difficult, because you need time for coaches to believe that what you're doing is going to work, and I think a lot of coaches get scared because you look like you're taking time away from your technical and tactical stuff and focusing too much on the physical. And then the other side of things then is like, if you get too much control over, say if I get too much control over, I don't want to make it all S&C or bits and pieces. So I think you have, first off, you have to start with the coaches anyway and find out what style of game they want to play, because it doesn't matter what I know and how to, because you'd give me an athlete, I know how to make them faster, I know how to make them fitter, I know how to make them stronger. But realistically, it's like, well, how does the coach want the team to play? Like if the team is going to be, again, I'm working with a camogie team at the moment, in Clare, and it's like the question is like, okay, well, how are you going to play? Because if you're going to be pucking ball out long and then hoping for winning second ball, dirty ball, and then your shooting range is like, maybe between the 21 and the 45, like that, versus right, we're actually going to play a short puck out and we're going to work the ball through the hands. Like both of those styles of play are very different, and then all of a sudden now the physical qualities that you need are different. And I think that's if you get the chance to work with coaches for the entire year, because you have time to work with both of them, the skills coaches and even the selectors, so that everyone's on the same page, so that when you do give them something to do, that they're okay, this is what we need to do. Versus the other side, if you're working with a group for maybe, let's call it maybe one session a week for 4 weeks or one session a week for 4 months, whatever it is, short term, that's where you'd almost use the game demands of the sport that you're working with to guide what you're going to do, because you might test them, find out where their starting point is for either speed or fitness, and then be like, okay, well, here's the sessions that you need to do over the next 3 or 4 weeks, and here's the benchmarks that are a rough idea of where your team should be, and you're using whatever research is there to guide them towards that endpoint, because now you're just using what we have available to us versus having the luxury of time and having to ask better questions during sessions, go out and watch sessions yourself as the S&C coach. Don't actually do anything, but just watch it, and then combine what we know with what's actually going on, versus coming in blind and being like, okay, we're going to do this, this, and this, because you end up with this like trying to make a massive overhaul to training sessions rather than being able to take what's already working and just maybe adjust little things here and there, because it suits the players maybe a little bit better as well.
Yeah, I'll just shout out previous episodes there. Philip Connors did his PhD on demands of inter-county camogie, and Fionn O'Shea, who's done so much on GPS and stuff. But like, I was to imagine where I currently am. A couple of years ago, we were talking about how we were trying to change things in a team, and he said, I regret a bit year one, we needed an evolution rather than a revolution. And it's like you were saying there, you don't want to completely change training, you're just going to slowly change little bits as you go through. And if you can get, like I'm at the point now where if someone asked me to go in and do physical training for 6 weeks and then leave, I wouldn't do it. I'm like, it'll have so little knock-on impact. I'm not interested. You're running a business, that's your sole source of income. You have a slightly different approach that you have to take there as well. But if you can integrate over the season, it's just so much better. You can look at what games they're playing. If they're playing an awful lot of small-sided games, I know my physical top-ups will have to be longer. If they do an awful lot of open games, I might need to do a little bit more change direction stuff with them. If they do no speed work, I just need to find a point in the week where they can do 4 sprints, and they'll get an awful lot from that. And sometimes, as you said, just looking at training and see what's maybe missing or they're doing slightly too much of, and tweaking that will often give more of a benefit. And it might just be a case of changing like the timings of games. Instead of going out and playing 4 by 10 minutes, play 8 by 4 minutes, and give them those 3 minutes of recovery. Or if they're stopping for 6 minutes of a talk, could we condense that down to maybe 2.5, 3 minutes? They might get more of a benefit that way.
Yeah, 100%. And just, I suppose, on 2 things, it's what you said there around us getting asked to go in and do 6-week sessions. So we still do them. But what I've started to try and do for ourselves is to have the first session of each one of those blocks as a coach education session. So that we go out and we might do a coach education session for 45, 60 minutes, whatever it is. And then the first session might encompass 2 or 3 age groups. So you might do say you're going to camogie club and you might do a 14s and 16s session together, and we'll run through a session framework on the pitch. We'll run through it in the clubhouse first. This is what the session is going to look like. We only have an hour. Here's what we need to get done. If it's on a Tuesday, this is what we might do. On a Thursday, this is what we're going to do. And then we go out and here's where we're gonna get the most bang for our buck. Because I think then at least then you've got the actual maybe physical development from those 6 weeks, but then you've got the education alongside it with the coaches being like, okay, we're here. At least when you're gone, then there's some bit of continuity, because that's always the biggest problem. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong, as well as like they'll do S&C for 6 to 8 weeks. Like we get it all the time. Like they'll come to us for 8 weeks during the off season, and then there'll be nothing after that for maybe 6 months. And while physical development things will stick around, and maybe like skill development will stick around for a little bit longer, and you're not necessarily starting from scratch every time you start again, but you'd get so much better if you were just to continuously tip away, even if it was once every 2 weeks or just some form of anything, or then trying to combine your physical development in the gym with on the pitch, and trying to make that kind of transition. And where do we put it? How can we do it? So if we wanted like some speed work or some contact prep or some conditioning top-ups, where in the session can we put it without feeling like we're robbing coaches of time?
Yeah, I find as well that if you do the big 6 weeks, they'll usually have an unbelievable league, because they're like way fitter than they ever have been previous years. And they might get a bit of like just a psychological bounce out of that, and players are more bought in. But by the end of like their championship run, like they're probably broke down with injuries, they're clinging on, they're not fading out games well. The other bit I find with that is if you can identify a couple of like influential players and be like, instead of you're standing around stretching, if you did like Nordics or some long lever hamstring bridges instead of your cool down at the end, might help you keep on top of a few bits. And if those influential players can drive a little bit, or even just get some kind of decent-ish warm-up, or like they push that, can we sprint on Tuesday nights? And they just push that little bit, the coach is often more likely to listen to that come August, even though you've been gone since the middle of April or whatever.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that's right. Like it's the biggest bang for your buck exercises, like you said, like your jump, even 3 or 4 sprint exposures. Like we've GPS data now from been working with 3D United Senior Women's, like, and we've identified Tuesday as our Tuesday night where we might only do 2 to 4 30-meter sprints, and the speed development that we've seen now across the entire year, like it's, you've got, I think the average across the squad was like maybe 27.5, 28, whereas now you're getting, the majority of your squad now are in the 29s to 30s, like, which, and it doesn't come from one session. It just comes from doing the same thing over and over again for 6-7 months. And it's not revolutionary. It's just simple, basic, and consistent.
Yeah. Show another previous episode, Paul Talty, I just asked him, what's your underrating? He said consistency. Just do something for a long time, you'll be amazed at how much better you get. To jump back into your framework there, we just want to touch on some of your approaches to just straight up getting stronger.
The strength work.
So after our speed work, then you're into, so we have 1 or 2 strength blocks depending on what we're trying to work with. So strength block A will typically be our primary bilateral movement. Typically it's going to be some form of a squat or a trap or a deadlift or something. We'll go depending on what sort of plyos happen before it. We might go bilateral squat movement, and then we might go lower body power, so that's your kind of A1, A2, and then your A3 might be usually it's a lateral core exercise, so a side plank, because you'll have your I suppose your sagittal plane stuff with your squats and stuff, and then just getting some lateral movement in there as well. If we do plyos beforehand, then it'll just be a simple lower upper core framework. So we'll do a lower body push, an upper body pull. So it'll be kind of like maybe trap bar, chin ups, side plank, and then our second block. So we're looking at probably 3 to 4 sets of usually between 3 to 8 reps is your rep range for that. And then our strength block B then is going to be just the opposite of that. So you'll have a lower body, probably hinge or lunge. Typically, obviously, if the primary movement, if the squat pattern, then our secondary movement is going to be a hinge. So it's going to be some form of a single leg hip thrust, single leg RDL, single leg, say, hamstring slider exercise. And then we're going to go with probably a upper body push. If we're going chin ups, then we're going to, so dumbbell bench press, incline dumbbell bench press, sometimes barbell bench press if we're adding it in there. And then another form of either mobility or core again. So we might add in a plank variation or a specific mobility variation that we need to throw in there. And then our last block then is going to be our resilience block. So we'll typically put our any extra mobility exercise we need to add in, 1 or 2 here, or we'll do our isometric work. So we're looking at our, I don't know if you've seen the Cal Dietz spring ankle series. So we'll do some form of one of those 5 positions. Typically it's number 5 where you're in this fully upright position and you've got your ankle as much ankle range as possible, and loading that as heavy as you can for 45-60 seconds. Or we're doing a hamstring isometric, a long lever adductor, or a split squat isometric, depending on what sport we're working with or what we're trying to work on in terms of that session. That's our strength block, and we'll get through that in probably 20-25 minutes.
That resilience block is probably where you get the chance to be more sport specific, or where you want to be more sport specific than anywhere else. It's where you're like trying to tick a specific box as opposed to a broad generic physical box.
Yeah, and that becomes like obviously sport specific, individual specific, but also like session specific. So if we're working with field sport athletes, and it's a acceleration session versus I say a max velocity session or a change of direction session, that's obviously, you know, you're going from either a spring ankle series to maybe a hamstring isometric, or you're doing a long lever adductor. So you might do one of those three depending on what you're working on. And then typically most of the time with Irish dancers, you're going to be working on some form of ankle isometric, or some form of lateral hip work, because they tend to be quite weak in that area as well. Because everything is so straight line and up and down, they don't do a whole pile of rotation or kind of lateral hip stuff. So in terms of injury issues, typically what we'll do, a lot of athletes that have come to us will have been to a physio at some point. So all we do is we ask them, or we go to the physio and just ask them, like, okay, what's the primary thing you're looking at all the time with these things, and they tell us, and they're like, okay, that's what we're going to focus on now. And that's where, while we're not essentially a multidisciplinary team, we can still act like it in terms of trying to do what's best for the athletes within that session.
Yeah, it's really good. Some of that resilience stuff, I know it's you're working through lately as well, but the David Gray, is the ankle and Achilles one you're going through at the minute, or the hip one?
Yeah, it's funny because so as in, obviously I know, like, when you go through the hospital rehab, their job is to get you back to being pain free and to function. Their job is not to return you to sport. So their rehab timelines are much longer. And I it's always like plays around in my brain because I broke my arm before as well. So you're always looking at those timelines and you're like, I can definitely shorten by at least 50% by getting some form of range of motion in early, some form of loading in a range that I can tolerate, and at a frequency at a frequency that I can tolerate as well. So I think I must have bought it 2 years ago, and I have never opened it. And I think just obviously because I was sitting at home, I was like, okay, now's the perfect time to go through it. So I'm starting on phase one, and my wife's gonna kill me when I say this. I'm back to walking on it in the house without the boot on. So
When she's not there.
I'm hoping to be back like a little bit sooner, but just going through that David Gray stuff, I think like that, those programs as well, I think they probably built or warm up or resilience section on a lot of those like principles, because they're kind of similar across all sports as well. I think he's one that we've kind of like copied a lot of stuff from.
Yeah, no, I'm the exact same. I'm actually working through it at the minute because I've a big knee issue at the minute. I'm really trying to sort it, but I know when I do get back to running, I have not run. I think it's 18. I hit an 18-week streak on Zwift this morning, so it's obviously 18 weeks since I ran last. So I just know I need to prepare my lower leg for when I do eventually go back running stuff. And I've been playing around with that and just seeing what exercises are hard, what are easy, what do I notice a benefit from. So when I'm giving to athletes, I'm not just do this. I have a bit more of a why around it, and I find that really good. Question actually on your strength stuff there. You're doing like an A1 and A2 and A3 and stuff. I often wonder, is that like, say you do a strength lift and maybe some kind of power lift, is that the best way to bring along strength and power together, or is the best way to manage a group of people with the limited amount of space and resources, equipment wise, that I have? Like if you were given to an individual to go do on their own, would it be straight exercise, or would you still look at that, some of that pairing of stuff?
I tend to pair everything again, because especially when you're working with someone who is only training once a week, I think a lot of it is just a timing thing, and you're just trying to condense an awful lot of what they need to get done into one session. But I still think even for our twice a week templates, it obviously depends on whether we do the plyos before our speed work or not. So if we've already done that, there's probably no need to do it again. So therefore, we'll probably just go with a straightforward kind of lower upper core or lower upper mobility framework. But I think sometimes, depending on the athletes that you're working with, sometimes you're just trying to get them to have more intent. So, for example, like if you like, I'll typically sometimes pair a trapper deadlift or a back squat with like a box jump, and I think a lot of times it's just because I want them to have the intent to jump or move as fast as they can when they go back um to the squat movement, whatever it is. And the pairing of those two together works quite well from as a learning tool versus like getting too concerned with developing kind of strength and power at the same time, because realistically, if they're getting stronger and they're doing their sprint work, then you should see that transition or translation essentially of those qualities to performance.
Yeah, I think the same. I'm wondering, like, is there a huge benefit to like the contrast stuff? But sometimes just for group management and in their head driving the intent, I find it really good that way.
Yeah, space wise, well, just on that, like obviously you go from working with one athlete, so you can kind of program whatever you want. But then we go to scenarios where we've worked with 25, 30 athletes in the gym at a time, and now all of a sudden you do have to go, like you're usually programming it from a logistics side. So you'll have a usually you'll have a rack exercise, you'll have a bench exercise, you'll have a floor exercise, and then you might have a track exercise. So now you might, again, this probably sounds excessive where you got 4 exercises in there, but you might have 3 or 4. But now you've got, like, you're managing for space, and you can do a back squat, you can do a dumbbell bench press, and now you can do a core exercise, or you can do your back squat, a box jump, and a bench or a dumbbell bench press. So you're just utilizing space a bit more. Because you're not dealing with athletes who have maximized strength either. So then you don't have to devote a lot of time to getting specific with rep ranges and getting specific with rest times. Like if you give someone a minute versus a minute and a half who's only doing maybe 12 reps with the 6 kilo dumbbell, like that's not going to affect your training program too much. I think that's you're always battling with those logistics all the time, especially when you're working with larger groups.
Yeah, I think it's something we don't teach. It's something I'm trying to do more in the college groups now. Like I have a second year S&C module, and they're going out on a full year's internship after that. And I'm always saying, right, we're designing a session. Before you think of like best exercise order to follow, where are you doing it? How many have you? And what equipment have you? Because that like will completely reconfigure what's in front of you. I think like when I was a PE teacher, sometimes you might put 2 classes together. So you could have 60 third years in front of you, and you're trying to make up one big circuit from all. That like really hones it in that I have to keep these busy for the next hour. How can I do it with what I have? And you're thinking, how can I use hula hoops? How can I use throwing a soccer ball somewhere here, or pull out a pommel horse, something like that.
From a coaching side too, for new coaches especially, like it also makes your life easier, because now you can patrol the room and you can coach more often. And it just, I think from an energy side as well, like it just makes the room's always moving. You're coaching this and that, and you're just constantly going. I think just that creates a better environment when there's like a lot of things happening, provided you do it cleverly, where you've got one maybe heavy technical exercise, and then the other 2, one might require a tiny bit of coaching, but one of them doesn't require any. And you can just almost forget about that. Just make sure people are still doing it. I think just from a coaching side and logistics, it just helps.
Yeah, that's really important actually around the level of technical skill required. You might have one exercise and you might love to put in 2 or 3 more, but you have to layer them in over the next couple of weeks, because I want to make sure everyone's good at this one, and all the others are just like really low skill. They might not be as good physically for what we want, but in a couple of weeks they'll be able to add in something more technically. Just touched on David Gray there and a few others. I remember I messaged you a few weeks ago about doing the broad jump into a hurdle jump off the box that I saw Blaine McConnell doing. Like, do you use some of that like to stay up to date? And even some of your sessions, like, are they a bit like some of the Will Rattel YouTube videos as well? Because I know I'm trying to draw on a lot of those to just provide a bit of variation, some of the trend I'm doing. Are you looking at some of those alongside? Like, obviously you're getting some of the research fed across to you from those coming in from the Masters in UL.
Yeah, a good bit. I think like very early on when I started coaching, I was notorious just for like, you'd have maybe 10 to 12 people that you'd follow for different things. And then anytime they bring out a program, I'd buy it straight away. Not because I wanted to copy it, but because I wanted to know how they got there. And I wanted to know, like, okay, like why, like, because if you understand why anything is done, it's very easy pick and choose them when you want to do it, versus working in reverse, being like, yeah, I saw this, I'm going to try it and see what happens. And I think the one in particular, the broad jump into the hurdle jump, I've been looking at maybe adding in some different broad jump variations, and how would you add in some like multi-directional, multi-vector plyos, and I think that fitted. And I think Anya, like Anya's she's 21 now. She's been training me. She's about 15. So like she's been doing like broad jumps, double broad jumps, triple broad jumps, single to double broad jump variations. There's a lot of things she's done already. And I think things like that where you've got intent built into them, where you can change little bits so often that you could do that exercise for maybe call it 3 months weekly, and you would never really get bored because you can increase the height of the hurdle, you can increase the um, distance away, you can maybe add in 2 hurdles, you can then add in maybe 2 broad jumps before the hurdle. So there's different like variations you can add to that. But to your point, I think it is important that we stay, because I think in college, especially in university, we're very in the research. And a lot of times, I say a lot of times, sometimes what happens in research isn't what happens in real life. And you need to be able to um, adjust. And I think by following those people who are kind of like smack bang in the middle between like being very up to date with the research, but also like have tried it themselves in real life, I think you get a better understanding, and I suppose again a broader like variation or broader toolbox of exercise that you can use for athletes depending on what you're looking for, and also from a bit of crack as well, especially you got someone who's training every day of the week. It's like, right, here's a challenge for you. Here's what I want you to do. I'm not going to coach it, but here's maybe how you could do it a little bit better, and then just kind of like let them at it. Because like good athletes, they want to have a certain level of challenge, and it's finding that sweet spot between enough challenge but not so much that they feel like they can't do it. And then that's just, again, it's the S&C kind of world where you're trying to balance all of these different things all of the time.
Yeah, that's a good. Like I was talking to me physio about this, and we were having various discussions around how to not have a really sore knee. But we were saying about like it's really important to be true to the adaptation. Like it's still about getting the adaptation you want, and then you can be somewhat creative with all the tools underneath that. So looking at like any of them, Blaine McConnell, any of them, to see the standing triple jump, it will give me the horizontal expression of force that I want, as will a sled, in different ways, but they're still developing what it is I want to develop, as opposed to this is a fancy new exercise, let's throw this in without really a justification around why I'm doing it.
Yeah, especially when you get usually like younger athletes, and I've been guilty of this as well, when you see an exercise and you use it straight away, and then because you either haven't tried it yourself or you haven't looked at it for long enough, there's a bunch of things. So there's always a risk factor with any exercise, for various different reasons. And it's understanding those risk factors and how you can maybe limit them. And then there's, we'll say, a bandwidth of ways in which this exercise can be done wrong. I think as your coach, it's more about understanding them and knowing then, because I think once you understand how it can be done wrong, your coach's eye can get dialed into what you're supposed to be looking at, versus trying to go from the other side where like, okay, I know what it looks like when this person who did it perfectly looks like. So that's what it needs to look like, versus, right, here's things that can go wrong and I'm just going to fix these little things as we go, versus picking an exercise and then it doesn't really work out how you thought it was going to be the first time. And then you're unsure of, okay, what do I do now? And all you have to fall back on then in those scenarios is like, well, here's an example of what it looks like. Why can't you do it? And it's just that's where younger coaches and coaches where especially if you're working with athletes for a long time, you can get bored as a coach too.
Yeah, completely agree. And it's more like going deep on stuff. Like I remember reading everything Westside Barbell had and trying a bit of that. And I remember watching, I know he's gone a bit mad now, but Mark Bell had like a YouTube series around like 2015, 2016. He got in all these experts. Like I learned so much from all those combat, like really deep on bench press technique or squat technique. And you try it and then you just adapt over time and you put your own spin in it and you understand why it works and why it might not work in certain situations. Just been really good so far. I want to give you a chance before we get too late to plug your business and all. I'm thinking like I need to front load that a bit more for people. Then we'll just touch on a little underrated and overrated.
Okay, so so we're actually open 4 years this year. So just as a timeline, open 4 years this year. It started as elite performance coach and now transitioned to athlete side performance. Purely as a way of giving athletes the opportunity to train like athletes, so that you didn't feel like you had to go to maybe like a Hyrox or a CrossFit to get fitter during your off season, that you could be coached by S&C coaches or performance coaches who understood what it took to be better at your sport, but also then as a place where S&C coaches could get experience coaching athletes as well. That's what we're our kind of secondary goal has been for Atlas of Performance. So based in Limerick, very, very close to Mary I. So if there's anyone around there, hit us up. You can find us on the website. So atlashbc.ie is the website. And follow myself on Instagram as well, SW_elite. It's been that way for a long time, from the elite performance coaching days, and I just haven't had the courage to change it. So I think I'm just going to leave it as SWE for a while. We sporadically take on new clients. I'm still in this phase where we're trying to figure out what way the business wants to go regarding do we want to double down on kind of like individual coaching, or make it more accessible. I just still from the business side, I'm still kind of like floating over and back between that. But if you are interested in coming down and checking out the place, find us on our website, find us on Instagram, and go check us out.
Great. And just give us S&C, sports related, general life, one thing overrated, one thing underrated.
Underrated in life, setting boundaries with everyone, and guarding your time. It's something that I'm probably struggling with now at the moment, big time, around balancing between, I suppose, being an S&C coach, a business owner, and then you have obviously the things that come with that, being head of HR, finance, business, all the things you don't know anything about, versus just being an S&C coach first and foremost. So setting your boundaries in terms of like, right, Joe, here's what I'm going to do. And if you need to contact me these times. And then don't feel bad for, like, I'd say, ignoring people. But it's like, in no other job do you feel like you can text anyone at any time of the day and expect a text back almost immediately. So that's something that I'm playing around with a bit more, taking a bit more time for myself. And then underrated. That was underrated. Overrated. I would say S&C coaches trying to go out on their own too early. I think that and I've been guilty of this, but I think now creating an atmosphere in Atlas where it's a team effort. I think what you'll see is athletes or coaches fresh out of college thinking that they can do better because they've seen one scenario of where things might not have been done as well as they might have been done. So all of a sudden we get this jump, and usually it comes from a good place, but you end up in this scenario then where, okay, I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna do it better, versus almost having this like collaboration between people where I'm like, okay, well, I saw this, Joe, would you think about this? And I think as S&C coaches, we get almost too proud of ourselves, where like if you get corrected by someone, that you're like, well, what you mean? And I think it's a lot of things in that where all we see now is little clips and snippets of training. So we're trying to give advice based on what we saw, but you haven't seen like anything else that's happened across the entirety of a session. Different exercises can be done different ways for different outcomes. And I think having a bit more like collaboration where coaches are starting to work together versus, I'm going to go out and go on my own, because I think they think that from a career wise, the only way to make money in S&C is to go out on your own. Whereas all it does is just create this environment where you might have 2,000 S&C coaches in the country, probably more, probably is more, but you've got all of them doing their own thing rather than combining together at some point to be able to do more, create more impact, to find the right answers earlier, to not make as many mistakes. Because what you'll have is, and this is for myself as well, early days you're using your own clients almost as guinea pigs because you're not really sure what the best way to do things is. And I think like thinking that you can do better just because you saw a scenario where maybe you didn't like how it was done, or versus like, maybe having some collaboration there. I think that's something that there needs to be something done there somehow. I don't know how that works in terms of creating pathways for coaches to get exposure working with athletes regularly and understanding how to work with an athlete who also has a job, has other things to worry about, that the gym is life, especially with S&C coaches who get into S&C because they love training. Probably another thing, because why don't you love training? Because I love training. Whereas a lot of athletes don't love training. They love being athletes and competing in their sport. So that's just a thing that's probably rattled around in my head for a long time.
Yeah, that's really good. I hadn't thought of it like that. I often thought get out, get coaching as early as you can, making mistakes and get better and better and better. But the collaboration, the community, because there aren't huge opportunities for that. Bar you're kind of an assistant S&C somewhere, and sure, the obvious what you would think is progression of assistant S&C is to be head S&C or the main S&C. So you don't want to be the assistant. It's rare there's two working beside each other because it can be hard to manage that dynamic.
But and again, not to get it wrong, I do agree with get out, get coach, and make mistakes. But the problem is if you go out on your own and you make mistakes, the athletes that you're working with are the ones that lose out because you've made a mistake because you weren't sure. You lose out as the coach because now you don't have anyone to mentor you, being like, okay, well, that's not a bad idea. Here's what you maybe should have done instead or next time. And you'll also lose out from a business wide as well, because if you start making mistakes early, if you're trying to go out on your own, people won't want to work with you because you've made mistakes and you didn't get results. Because at the end of the day, as I know we talked about, the role of the S&C or performance coaches to improve or develop performance potential. If the team does well and performs well, you never get the credit for it. But if the team performs poorly, it will always be a fitness issue and it will always be your fault. That's just where we are at the moment, and that's just the facts of it. So you do have to factor that in. And I think it's important that young coaches have mentors in such a way where you can make mistakes and freely make mistakes by having ideas. But it's again, I know it's not the same thing, but you take doctors and stuff, and there's so many levels of but you always have someone that's above you who's done what you've done, who's there to guide you in a way, but you still get the freedom to collaborate with coaches who know more than you, but also then kind of make your own decisions within a setup. And that's the part that people need. And the problem is the only way to do that is to get out coaching for free with teams and coaches versus we'd say for example, what we're trying to do in Atlas is create an actual pathway of maybe a shorter term internship where I obviously have to protect the interests of my business as well, which is financially, that if coaches come in and they do a really good job, okay, well, here's more work for you, and we'll feed you with more work so that you can take. I started coaching in 2016 straight out of college. I didn't start getting very, very good at it really until maybe just before COVID hit. I would say that kind of 4 or 5 year span it's taken me to get to a point where I'm comfortable in, okay, here's my coaching, here's all the people I follow, versus coming straight out of college and straight away you're like, well, here's what my lecturer told me to do based on the research. But I'm like, yeah, but you're not on a research paper anymore. This is real life, and here's what's here. You only ever see limitations on research papers for the limitations of the research, not for the limitations for the application of that research into the real world, which is the problem that coaches will have.
Oh man, you've just dropped so many clangers there now. I'm like, oh, that's brilliant. I wish we'd front loaded all that stuff. Yeah, come on. Do you know what? That's the perfect place to just leave and be like, I'm going to let all that whirl around in your head for a few months and get you back on sometime next year, and we tease this out even further. No, fair play. That's been excellent, Stephen. All your social media stuff I will link in the description on Spotify, YouTube when this goes out. I'd encourage everyone to follow you just for general ideas around training, but also I love that your approach to training is the scientific principles in a really applied way across a number of sports and across males and females. There's no major variation there. I think that's all been really good to see, and people get a lot of ideas, but also in a way guidance from it also. Fair play to you, and thanks for coming on.
No, very welcome. Great to be on. Great to get, I suppose, Monday started and get the creative juices flowing for the rest of the week.